I was a homeless runaway at age 13. I left a very violent home environment. I didn't have a family. I couldn't look to somebody else to help me. I had to rely on myself.
Yeah.
I knew what it was like to be cold, to be afraid, to be hungry. I don't recall resting in 5 years. Well, I have a book coming out in a couple of months called The AI Tsunami, A Survival Guide for Humanity. I'm here because of the grace that God gave me. I have a unquenchable need to find and fulfill whatever purpose God had for me in changing my life that much. This was my battle for life, and I had to win.
Hello, and welcome to Crazy Amazing God Stories, where ordinary people share extraordinary moments of God revealing His power, grace, and love in our everyday lives. My guest today is a very interesting man. First of all, he's brilliant, but he's easy to talk to. He also has a very interesting way of looking at prophecies from the Bible, more specifically looking at them through the eyes of math. He wrote a book about it, but we'll go into that a little bit later. And this isn't necessarily new. For instance, in the book Science Speaks, it was first published in 1952 from Peter Stoner and Robert Newman. They famously selected 8 specific prophecies that they considered historically verifiable and straightforward, so they could calculate probabilities. And they aimed that their fulfillment in one person, Jesus of Nazareth, could not be a matter of chance. I think that their probability was 1 in 10 to the 17th power, or 1 in 100 cajillion, unbelievable. And they later used an analogy that's very famous. I'm sure a lot of people have heard it. It's the silver dollar in Texas analogy, where they say if they filled the state of Texas 2 feet deep with silver dollars, the chances of Yeshua or Jesus fulfilling those 8 prophecies is the same as someone walking into the state of Texas arbitrarily blindfolded and picking up a specific marked silver dollar. So that's the analogy that they used. I don't know how they got to that, so I'm not here to defend it. I'm just saying that the concept of looking at prophecies through math isn't new. Now, our guest today, he had a very humble beginning, and his story is very interesting. Please welcome to the podcast, Guy Morris. Guy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, David. My pleasure to be here.
You're a very fascinating guy, as I've said before already. I mean, we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and it kind of left me reeling. And I know that in order to follow you and your amazing brain, you really got to grab on and hold on and pay close attention. I thought it was poetic that today is May 4th. For those nerds out there, what that means is may the 4th be with you. So it's a kind of a Star Wars reference, but you definitely have a scientific mind and you're fascinating. So let's just jump right in. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am a very eclectic, unusual individual. I think I have led a very diverse life, and I feel very blessed by that. I've been artistic. I've been homeless. I've ridden in corporate jets. I've been in boardroom suites and arguments and drama. And I feel like God has given me a chance of seeing the real world in very unique and unusual and real ways. And I'm just blessed that I've been able to span all of those things. So, yeah, I think probably I always stumble when people ask me to describe myself. First off, because I really hate talking about myself, and I don't ever really think about myself in the ways that other people do. But I think the one way that I might be able to describe it is that when I got to college and I realized what an incredible, life-changing gift that was for me, I started learning to love the process of learning. I just wanted to absorb everything I could. There was a part of me that when I read about the Renaissance, I gravitated toward that. because men of the Renaissance were men that were artistic, but they were also engineers. They were men of
Yeah.
science. They were men of business and politics. They understood the reasons for war, but they hated the process. They were broad men, and in today's term, we would call them an inch deep and a mile wide. And in our culture, we like to have people who are deeply specialized in one thing. And I think I made the intentional decision that I want to buck that tendency. I really wanted to be a Renaissance man. I really wanted to try and go out and try and understand as much of everything that I could. And I think that's, now I'm not an expert in everything, obviously. But I'm an explorer. I'm a curious. I'm curious. I'm curiosity, um, um, uh, uh, cursed with curiosity, an unquenchable curiosity.
Well, that's actually a very good quality, especially in where it's led you so far. One of the most interesting things you told me about yourself was exactly how you got to college. Tell us a little bit about that. Tell me
That was
where you started.
the story. I didn't talk about it throughout my entire career until after I retired and started in therapy. But I was a homeless runaway at age 13. I left a very violent home environment where I was under direct threat. I never talk about that, but that started me on a life of trying to find a way on my own. Realize that I didn't have a family. I couldn't look to somebody else to help me get a car, or get through college, or I had to rely on myself. I got a GED at age 15. I hitchhiked to a Christian commune associated with a Grace Chapel in Tucson, Arizona.
Not far from me now.
It was at the time, it was run by a family of and a pastorate, and a staff of like 7 men from different religious background. One was a Baptist, one was a Lutheran, one was a Pentecostal. A couple of them were just non-denominational. The pastor had grown up as a missionary as a child, so he really had a heart for people, and especially people who weren't given lots of advantages in life. And I think that church really allowed me to dig in, create some roots. But I was still functionally illiterate. As a matter of fact, I was so distrusting that for the first several months, maybe a year that I was there, I allowed people, I didn't tell people my real name because I had, I have issues. So they called me by my street name, which was Punk. So I was sort of the strange kid, even in the church. And I got married young. My wife got pregnant right away, and all of a sudden I'm 19, 20 years old, and I'm facing the idea that I've now got to support a family. I wasn't even sure how to support myself. So I was working at the time as a produce truck driver, and I would be working from 5 in the morning to typically 8, 9 at night, 6 days a week, delivering to hospitals and restaurants and hotels and institutions for their restaurants and their food. It was an exhausting job,
Yeah,
lifting
that's hard work.
all day long, and I'm a little guy, and it
Early
was
mornings. Yeah.
hard work. And so I went to prayer, and I said I was exhausted. My day on Sunday would we go to church, and I'd wind up sleeping the whole day because I was just physically exhausted, and it was affecting my early marriage. And so I went to prayer and said, Lord, can I go? Can I quit my job long enough to go look for it? Can I send my wife to work just long enough so I can quit my job and find another job that isn't going to kill me? And I don't mind working. I'm going to work, Lord. I'm going to work hard. I just need to find one that's where I can also have a family life. And in prayer, I felt probably 3, maybe 4 times in my life where I felt a powerful voice from the Lord, one that I couldn't explain, one that was palpable. I couldn't shake it. And I said, I want you to go to college. I want you to call the university and ask for an application to go to school.
So
And
you're
my thought was, no, Lord, you didn't understand the question. I think I'm getting cosmic cross signals with somebody else, maybe maybe a neighbor or somebody like that. Lord, I'm asking for a job. I don't have money to go to school. I don't have an education. I never took an SAT score. I didn't even finish high school.
You
I
had
need
your
a
GED
job.
at this point, right?
What's that?
You had your GED at this
I had
point,
a
right?
GED, but a GED, I only got the GED because I had been working since I was 12, mainly migrant worker jobs, and I would lie and get like Kentucky Fried Chicken jobs at 13. I would lie and say I was 16. I'd been working and I had pay stubs, and in California at the time you could earn school credits by working part time.
Yeah.
But I had enough credits to graduate, even though I missed most of the ninth grade and I barely had finished the 10th grade. So it was a weird thing. I was still pretty bad off. And at that point, I had gone to, I didn't know this at the time. I learned it when I got my transcripts for college. I had gone to 16 different schools. I could only remember 3.
Oh, wow.
And so my childhood was lost in this fog of amnesia. And so the idea of going to school was really crazy. But I went back to prayer and said, Lord, no, you missed. I need to know, can I send Susan to get a job so I can look for another job? That's all I need to know, yes or no. And I felt, I want you to get up right now. And I want you to go to the phone and call the university. I want you to ask for an application. I'm going to send you to school. I want you to go to school. So I get up and I go to the phone, and my wife asks me, what are you doing? And I explain it to her, and she says, that's crazy.
Yeah, that
Are
sounds
you
crazy.
sure? And I said, no, I'm not sure. Obviously God isn't going to send me to school. I'm an idiot. Yeah, but maybe he's asking me to do some obedience thing so that he'll then give me the job I need. So
Right.
let's just be obedient. I'm going to be embarrassed. We're not going to tell anybody about this because we don't want people, because people will just think they know I'm not college
They'll laugh
educated.
at you.
Exactly. And I had enough people laughing at me in my life. I didn't want to give them reasons, but I did it. I got the application. I had to have my wife's help to complete it because I couldn't understand some of the questions and I couldn't articulate my answers. She had to help me complete the application. I send it off thinking, okay, well, that's, it's a month before. It's like in early August, late July at this point. School starts in like a month. I said, this is the silliest, dumbest thing I've ever done. I kept thinking, okay, God, I'm being obedient. Now what? I've still got to find another job. A couple of weeks later, I get a letter, and I'm 24 units short of the minimum requirements. I have no SAT scores, but they're going to let me in. And my
What?
first thought was, oh my gosh, I was disillusioned. I thought they only let smart people, hardworking smart kids into school. They must let any idiot in. I said, boy, and I said, and I still don't have any money and I still need another job. And I threw the letter in the trash. The very next day, I get a letter from my father-in-law. Now, we had not said anything to anybody. And he basically said that I had been on his heart, and that he was a wealthy man and sent all of his girls to Ivy League schools. They grew up with maids and drivers and chauffeurs, and they were like the different part of the world. And he did not want me to marry his daughter. She did it out of rebellion. I did it because I was low self-esteem, and I thought, well, this is a nice girl who's, I just thought, boy, I cashed in. So he's basically said he felt that I had been disadvantaged in life, but if I was willing to continue to work to support the family, he would be willing to pay for my tuition and books.
Just out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere.
He had no idea that you had applied.
No idea I'd applied. I hadn't told anybody. I hadn't even told my best friend because I was convinced that they would laugh at me. And even when I told everybody that I had been accepted to college and I was going back to school, there was a lot of people that had their response of, oh, look at you trying so hard. It's like, it's pity. I got pity, that I was trying to, that there was no way I was going to make it. But
How old were you at this point?
good for you for trying. I was 19.
19.
And so I had been working, digging
What
ditches.
school? What school did
Tucson, Arizona, to University of Arizona. Um, so I spent 4 years. I worked the graveyard shift at 7-Eleven to support the family. I took 22 to 24 units of school every semester, including summers. I thought I was going to fail the first 2 years. I was struggling to get my grades above a C. And then something clicked. And all of a sudden, I started skyrocketing. I started pulling in B's and A's. I started shooting to the top of the class. I ended up on the dean's list. I graduated with multiple degrees. I was given a full scholarship to go to grad school. I was given an intern job at IBM when I did an interview. I was accepted into the offered to go to the Harvard MBA program, but without a scholarship, and I couldn't afford that, and was given a letter from the Federal Reserve because in my desperation, I slept 2 to 4 hours a night for 5 years, and it got me sick. But in my determination to that God was giving me a chance to change my stars, the last thing I was going to do was take it for granted. I was going to put everything I had into it. I had created a macroeconomic model based on a unique theory I had developed that hadn't been proven, and I bet the dean that if I could beat every other student in the school, would he consider me for a scholarship? Can I explain my situation and how hard I was trying to kind of get ahead in my life? And he said he would consider it, but he didn't make any promises. My model not only beat out everybody in the school, I beat out everybody in the nation, including the Federal Reserve, and it changed how we build models to this day. I had developed a set of algorithms that I believed could predict the level of economic value, the GDP impact of technology-driven productivity. And this was in the late 70s. So this was extremely innovative for the time. The Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, for a decade, the Federal Reserve adopted my model. They incorporated into their models. They talked about the productivity value of technology for over a decade. That was all based on the algorithms I had developed. And that started my career. I went to grad school, got my MBA. I left IBM, went back to the California coast where I was more comfortable, and went to work for Burroughs and then Occidental Petroleum and then Oracle and Microsoft. And it was a whirlwind career.
And it all started from a command from God to tell you to go to college when you never would have gone on your own.
I was told my entire growing up that I was stupid and worthless, and that my best chance at being able to support myself was to join a trade union. That was the only chance I would ever have. And so I was as surprised as anybody. And it took me decades before I stopped having this subconscious sense of that I was a poser, and that if anybody really knew that I was just this dumb kid that got lucky, I wouldn't be sitting in the executive suite with the CXO. And it took me decades to realize that God had gifted me and given me a chance I never would have given myself.
Yeah. Yep. He's famous for that. So what caused you to become obedient at such a young age, being homeless and being taken in by a commune? What triggered your obedience? Because it does.
I honestly don't know. I honestly don't know. I can tell people desperation. Coming off the street after 7 years of basically supporting myself on the street.
Did you learn that obedience was critical in your walk with God? Or you just didn't see another way?
I would hear at the time the pastors, there was the to obey is better than sacrifice. Remember the green
Yeah.
I can't remember his name. There was a song, "To Obey is Better Than Sacrifice," and we had lots of sermons on that. And the Lord talked about it, and in his sermons to his disciples. And one of the things that I think really anchored me early on was because we had this pastorate staff of multiple pastors from different backgrounds. They had this kind of concept that they would all take turns preaching. So they all had different styles, different themes, different approaches, different doctrinal backgrounds. But one of the things they all agreed on was that the the doctrinal differences of the Christian community are man-made, not God-made. But that if we wanted to reunite and if we wanted to really center on what was true, we put everything in the background except for the Gospels and the teachings and the examples of Christ. That was our new foundation. That was the pinpoint of our faith. Everything else was a distraction and could take us away from that pinpoint. And I don't know what caused that level of obedience, but I will say there was a level of desperation. I knew what it was like to be homeless.
Yeah.
I knew what it was like to be cold, to be afraid, to be hungry, to move all the time because you don't want people to figure out where you are and who you are and what you are and call the police or worse.
Did you tell your wife that you felt that God had told you to do this, or did you keep that part to yourself?
We were in prayer. I told her, I think God's telling me I'm supposed to do this. She even thought it was kind of crazy, and she was surprised they let me in. But she thought, okay, well, then we still got to figure out what to do with the job thing. I didn't think, I honestly didn't think it would happen. I honestly thought it was just, lay out the fleeces kind of thing. It was one of those kind of things. You do the symbolic thing, and then God will reward you with the thing you
Well,
really
that's his
need.
style. He does like to
I
make
didn't
sure that there's
know
no
that
other
what I
question.
really needed for a job was an education first. And God said, yeah, you do need a better job. But first, you're not ready for a better job. You have to go to school and figure out and find yourself first. And I had been so independent for so long that I didn't want to accept anybody's help for anything. It was a humbling experience for me as well to take money from somebody else when I hadn't proved myself. And so I've got my father-in-law investing in me for my family's purposes. The last thing I needed to do is betray that.
Right.
And so it was a difficult period for me. As I said, I was paranoid. I was paranoid I would fail.
It seems that
Terrified.
God put you in the perfect space, though, to keep you in line. Like He put the pressure on from your father-in-law at the same time, opened these doors, and then you had in the back of your mind what it's like to dig out of dumpsters to eat. So like all these forces coming at the same time, that just seems like God's hand. He has this specific way of handling us. It's very tender, but it's also very
While
godlike.
other kids in my class were spending the weekends partying,
Yep.
I don't recall resting in 5 years. This was my battle for life, and I had to win. Had to win. I didn't know what it meant. I still was dysfunctional in a lot of ways. I didn't realize it. I wouldn't realize it, and it wouldn't be diagnosed. Even though I would seek help continuously through my career, I wouldn't be diagnosed. I had complex post-traumatic stress from my childhood. And throughout my career, I still struggled with addiction. I struggled with chronic depression, with hyper anxieties, frequent night terrors. I spent years where I couldn't sleep 4 or 5 nights a week, and I would only catch up a couple nights a week, and I would run on that energy. I felt for years that I couldn't slow down because otherwise I would just stumble and be consumed by something. And it was all post-traumatic stress. So even though I was succeeding in my career, I was hiding who I was from everybody at work, and honestly hiding who I was from everybody at church because they couldn't understand.
Yeah, that's a lot
It
to
was always, well, just ask
back
Jesus
then.
to do
Yeah.
this and just ask to do that. And just, well, you're just don't have enough faith. And I even had one Christian counselor decide that she needed to cast demons out of me.
Ooh.
And that actually made it worse because then I hid deeper and deeper and deeper with myself.
Okay, let's rewind a little bit. Now, tell me. I know that you went to grad school. You said, but when you finally got that degree, that first 4-year degree, what was it like to tell your father-in-law that you went the distance?
Oh, yeah, that was a heartbreak. The last year before I got my degree and just before I got sick with valley fever, he got a brain tumor and went into a coma, and he passed away just before I graduated.
So he didn't get to see you
He
graduate.
never got to see me graduate. Now, the other sisters and my mother-in-law, they never liked the fact that he was generous with me this way. They thought that I was a user and I was a gold digger of some kind. And so, of course, when he passed away, when I wanted to go to graduate school, they said, "No, you're
There's
not
no
getting
more
any
money for
more
you.
of our inheritance," is the way they considered it, their
Yeah.
inheritance. And so that's why I needed to have that scholarship, is because the inheritance there was nothing else there. I really felt that I really wanted to go to graduate school, but there was a part of me that said, "Man, I could go to school for the rest of my life. This is so cool. I'm learning all these things." I thought about astrophysics and the sciences and the materials and engineering and history and archaeology, and I was just like, "Boy, I could be a professional student." And of course, there's no money in that, so I had to go out and get a real job. And the first job was with IBM, but then I went to an IBM competitor soon after that.
So what'd you do for IBM?
I worked. It was a manufacturing plant in Tucson, and they were building the plant, basically starting it up, and I was basically implementing and helping develop and implement the core systems for bringing in inventory and tracking their manufacturing processes and their sales processes. I was helping build out some of their internal systems in the 6 months before they actually opened the plant, and then I went to work for a competitor named Burroughs, which became Unisys, and there was another big mainframe manufacturer, and I was responsible for building out the actual configuration plans. The annual and quarterly and monthly planning really meant that there's all these orders, and they're all customized orders and configurations, which meant parts and ordering and all this stuff. And this was in the early 80s, so the computer systems were pretty kludgy back then. And so because I was good with all of the computers, I was responsible for trying to coordinate the manufacturing process and putting it into a computer system with recurring orders so that we could actually project accurately what our sales and costs were going to be per quarter, per month.
So you had to write the software, everything, right? You
I
just would go
didn't
right.
write the software, but I had to modify it and customize it because it was already there, but it wasn't really working well. And we had one point they came in with a big change that they had canceled a whole bunch of orders and added a whole bunch of new. And we were there for 36 hours straight trying to get it all put together so that we could report on time. So it was one of those early out of college high pressure roles where they're intentionally trying to burn people out to figure out who's going to last.
Threw you into a pit and said, "Learn. Let's see what you got."
Well, I was already
Forged
I
in
was
fire.
I was already burned out, so I was really fit for that kind of job. Whereas everybody else would start being, kind of dying at about 18 hours. I was like, wussies, I've done this before. You should see me in college. so, so I was like, okay, well, 36 hours straight. Yeah, I can do that.
Wow.
And so I was able to kind of survive that. And then a few years later, when I moved to Oxy Petroleum, I was responsible for their financial planning, first in their research organization, then in their global real estate, and then in their corporate planning and strategy. And I was instrumental in actually convincing them that we needed to put in personal computers into every department so that we could, and they were like, well, why? Nobody knows
Yeah.
how to use them. What are we going to do with them? And at that point, our annual planning was on the mainframe, and it was so difficult to use that it took 6 people 6 months to put together an annual plan. And I said, give me my own computer. Now, at the time, only the CEO, the president, and CFO, and the CIO had a computer. 4 people in the whole 150,000 organization. I said, give me my own and give me a few months, and I can write a program where we can take it off the mainframe, put it on a personal computer, and have hands-on touch in every department. I can cut this down to a single person in 2 months. And they're like, you're
What's
either
a personal
you're either
computer?
smoking dope and you're going to get fired for promising this, over promising and under delivering. But I had a boss at the time who believed in me, and he gave me the chance, and I delivered, and that changed that basically started a whole series of me saying, I think I can solve that problem in a way that maybe other people aren't thinking about, because I would have this weird way of looking at problems.
Well, you
And
were kind of at the genesis of computer development, like
yeah,
PC development, right?
I was at the early stages, and so I rode the wave of computer technologies my entire career, using the technologies, not just implementing them from an IT perspective, but being the business owner to say, I need a system to help me do this. And I would go out and find these innovative systems and implement them in my department. And I became the agent of change to go around the rest of the organization saying, see what I did, you can do this too. And I was that agent, um, change agent, and innovator and thought leader that would always be the guy taking the high risk that it could fail, because I was just excited about the technology. And I was, I figured I was really lucky to be there to begin with. If
Good timing.
I took a risk and I failed, maybe that was just, karma basically balancing out the good luck I had experienced.
And it all
So,
centers back to God telling you to do something that sounded crazy, that sounded insane. And you
and
were
that
like,
became
all right, we'll
a
try
way
it.
for my career. That became a theme through my whole career.
That was your
Me
style
telling
from then on
people,
out.
I think I can fix that, and being told 3 people have failed before. And I said, yeah, I know why they failed. I think I know why they failed. I can fix that. And that became my career.
Now you don't even see a mom and pop ice cream shop without a computer in it. I mean, people,
Oh
the
no. Well,
notion of
now
without
we're
a
at
computer.
a new wave of AI. And AI is going to be just as volatile of a revolution as the initial computer phase was. And I'm seeing a lot of the same sorts of institutionalized systemic issues that will help some succeed and others fail. And so we're really going through a whole nother wave of it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's been overstated that it's going to change the world as we know it
Hmm.
on multiple levels.
Well, I have a book coming out in a couple of months called The AI Tsunami, A Survival Guide for Humanity. And it's trying to help people understand, take away the fear and the confusion from around the technology, to describe it in simple ways, but then look at, well, what does this mean to us in terms of education, crime, elections, governance, surveillance, weapons, education, how is this going to affect our humanity? And let's bring it down to that level.
Try to take out some of the mystery of it, the mystique of it, and put
That,
into like, well, it's definitely going to do some stuff, but here's what it's going to do. Don't be afraid of this. Be afraid of this.
right. And one of the things I try to help people is, yeah, there are some risks in the technology for sure, especially as we approach general intelligence and conscious intelligence. And I explain what the paths to those things look like. But the biggest danger, I tell people, is that the machine is neither evil nor benign, but it's the people controlling the machines.
Like
It's
anything.
the sociopathic billionaire. It's the corrupt politician, the corrupt CEO, the drug lord, the crime lord, the everyday fraudster and scammer, the dictators of the world. It's how people who corrupt power will use this new power in a
Yeah,
corrupt way.
that
And
makes
that's
sense.
what we need to be afraid of. And
That
that's
makes
where
sense.
we have a chance now. I was part of a letter that was put out by MIT professor Max Tegmark in 2023 that basically said this is great technology, but it's also dangerous technology, and that in order to be wise with it, we need to take a 6-month pause, get together, and build some guardrails and regulations on how we can keep this being a safe technology. Not a single lab, 30,000 experts signed on to the letter, but not a single lab on the planet said okay, because they're all afraid of losing ground to somebody else because it's so competitive right now.
That's
So
the
we're
nature.
racing ahead towards things that 30,000 scientists basically believe there was at least 50% of them thought there was at least a 10% to a much higher percentage chance that AI could lead to an existential threat to humanity. But we're moving ahead.
Well, yeah, that's the nature of things. It's God works in mysterious ways. So you're the author of several books. As a matter of fact, you've written some pretty cool sounding
Yes.
fiction books.
Well, when I retired, it was on my heart to really talk about AI, prophecy, political corruption, and I took a cue from Michael Crichton. Michael Crichton was a medical doctor who had real deep issues against DNA cloning and DNA manipulation. And instead of writing a medical white paper that would have gotten published only in medical journals and read by other medical geeks, he wrote Jurassic Park to basically illustrate in a narrative way what can go wrong when we have this powerful new technology and combine it with greed and hubris. Well, I'm doing the same thing with AI and our political situation. And one of the things I'm doing uniquely is that I'm actually connecting those dots to how we're fulfilling prophecy in plain sight.
So the fiction, they're stories that are interesting and fantastical, but they have a underlying truth that you're trying to highlight.
Exactly. There's a real thought-provoking theme that I'm driving there because I'm really centering around those three themes. Now, each theme is anchored on real-world stuff, real-world experiences. Now, the AI in the that's featured in the series, and by the way, I've won a gold award for the first book, a silver for the second book. The third book came out. It won a Literary Excellence Award and an International Impact Award. It's up for Book of the Year. I have a separate book, not about AI, that was on Book Trip, Barnes & Noble's favorite 25 books of 2021. They called that one Indiana Jones Meets Da Vinci Code, which is cool, but I like Indiana Jones Meets Goonies for grown-ups, sprinkled with Stephen King. But the AI books were anchored or centered. I was inspired to write them when I discovered, somewhat by accident, that a program had escaped the Lawrence Livermore Labs at Sandia. Now, that's the Lawrence Livermore Labs at Sandia is basically an NSA/DARPA research lab for cyber and digital espionage. So it's essentially a James Bond Q division, right? It was an Associated Press blurb in the back of a reputable magazine, and it basically said that all it said was a program had escaped the Lawrence Livermore Labs at Sandia. If I knew something, to contact this professor at the laboratories or this FBI agent in charge of the investigation. That's all it said. I was immediately obsessed. I was like, okay, that's weird. It's either a typo. They meant to say the program was lost, or it was stolen, or it corrupted somehow. But they said it escaped. And it was like they couldn't find it. And so I spent a year obsessing about this, trying to research the art. I said, well, if they're doing that, they're having to use existing architectures and existing technologies. I said, maybe that's not what we're doing in a corporate America, because we don't really have a purpose for doing that. But I said, there's got to be a way to do this if it's true. It's either a typo or it's true. Let me figure out how they would do it if it's true. And I spent several months kind of reverse engineering how a program would escape, and then why would the NSA design a program with that capability. And as a friend of mine was a film producer at the time, and so I talked to him about this cool spy program loose on the internet and that they haven't captured, and we decided to make a cool webisode series about it instead of a film because it was cheaper. So we hired some out-of-work actors and did some film shoots and developed digital sets and wrote scripts, and we produced this webisode series, got through about 15 episodes, multiple, like 26 awards from around the world, fans from everywhere from China to Russia. My biggest fan had a nasa.gov alias. He was Orbit at nasa.gov. He was my biggest fan, wrote me long letters almost every week, because part of the plot was how a terrorist had planted a virus on board the space shuttle. And he was telling me how the space shuttle computers worked. It was really great. Everything was going fabulous until two FBI agents showed up at my door. Mm-hmm. They were not happy. I was over the top, obnoxiously giddy. Yes, I did it. I know why you're here. I did it. I figured it out. Oh, come on, boys. You wouldn't be here if I was wrong. I'm telling all my friends, this is so cool. Hey, show me your badge again. I was that bad. They gave me the "we are not amused" speech. I gave him a "what are you going to do about it" shrug, because I didn't break any laws. I just figured it out. And then my wife came home and gave me the "why are there two FBI agents in my dining room? This better be a damn good story." It was the best night ever. They went to the studio. A studio had optioned the show. They went to a studio and killed the option. So I lost some money. I had to tuck my tail between my legs. I think I went and worked for Oracle, either Oracle or a startup after that. But I never forgot the episode. It became an inspiring moment for me.
So was the episode made? Was it made? I mean, was the
Oh yeah, there was a program. It actually was made. It was designed to basically move wherever it wanted. And
the show? Was there? I mean, was it? You guys filmed it and it won some awards.
well, yeah, we
Is
had
it available
26
now?
episodes. No, 15 episodes of this webisode series. And but I was funding it at the time, and thinking I was going to get a deal with one of the studios. And when the studio deal fell through, I ran out of money and I had to go get a real job. But that became the premise. That became the baseline for the award-winning book series now.
So if a program can escape, then can a program stow away on a?
Can it hide?
Can it
The
get
same
in there on its
technology it
own?
used to escape, it can use to hide in any sort of network. So the estimate right now, and one of the things I claimed, was that this program was designed to hack into systems and remain hidden even from virus scans, and was there to basically spy, and that we had basically already integrated. At the time, I counted how many computers there were versus, I had some sort of calculation as to how deep the penetration was and what it was designed to do when it was there. And apparently I got enough of the features correct that it got the FBI it brought two FBI to my door. So it didn't even matter to
You
me
know
what.
what they were questioning you about? I mean, that's kind of like
Well, I think that
pretty
first off,
upper
they wanted
echelon.
to know how I knew. They wanted to know how I figured it out. So I showed them the article. I showed them my research papers. I showed them what I'd done, and I told them, I said, I'm really good at this. You guys should give me a job. And they did not like my attitude at
They weren't
all,
humor. They
any
weren't
level at all.
entertained.
They wanted to intimidate me, and I was just, that was not the night. I was just not going to be intimidated that night. I was so giddy that I had figured it out. So yeah, but it did become a spark in me to continually look at the technologies we were building and implementing in the commercial sector. There was a part of me that would go home at night and start researching, what's the government doing with this? What kind of contracts did the government sign? And what was DARPA working on with this? And how are they using technologies in dark ways that we don't hear about on the news? And that started that thread. And so the whole book series became based on that program, what we're now seeing in the political corruption we're seeing on the news every night. And then the prophecy analytics piece came from the we hadn't talked about it yet, but prophecy analytics came from my own
Curiosity.
framework for analyzing prophecy that was very analytical, outcome, attribute, correlation, probability based. And so it was the type of model that an AI would assume, as opposed to a more theological, dogma based kind of model.
Where you talk about where theologically they look for an event and then there's an outcome versus the AI would look for the outcome and the event may not be exactly what we would picture it.
Well, so prophecy analytics was, I've already mentioned, I've got trust issues, and my brain works in different ways, and it's weird. I know, but there was, as a young Christian who really needed to feel that I could trust my pastors and trust what I was being asked to believe in, I would be the nerd, especially after I learned to read, that would go home after the sermon and actually look things up and would read the context. And whenever I got to prophecy sermons, I was always bothered because oftentimes I got pastors who were either taking things out of context or they were applying something that didn't quite fit. It felt more like a bias as opposed to a fit. Some of them were kept saying, well, we're in the end times, but all of these things are in the future. All the seven seals, all this other stuff's in the future. And they would, over the years, I'd heard things like the Ayatollah's the Antichrist, or Obama's the Antichrist, or it was just things that just didn't seem to be rooted in what the text was actually saying. And so at one point in time, I said, well, in order for me I wanted to know for sure. To me, it was important. We either were living in the end times, which to me would then play a role in how I would make life decisions,
Sure. I
or
mean,
we
that would
wouldn't,
be,
or we weren't. And in which case, like a lot of people believe, and it's all being Revelations is all, metaphorical, right? So I thought, well, the only way for me to figure this out is for me to figure it out on my own. Trying to discern who's right and who's wrong from all the variations of prophecy teachings there are seemed to be, I thought it would be better for me if I could start with a clean slate. And but I wasn't sure what that meant. And so I would study and I would still listen, but I was kind of stumbling for a little while. And then I came across a National Geographic article. The article had to do with, I was involved in environmental work at the oil company, so that's why I was reading it, but it had to do with the loss of fish stocks in every fishing ground around the world. Every single one around the world was down by 30% or more. And while my first thought was to think about, well, okay, what's the environmental impact of this? Is there going to be legislation about this? Is this something the company needs to worry about? Another ping kind of hit my head and said, there was a prophecy about this. And I said, oh, yeah. And I had to look it up. It was the seven trumpets, the fourth trumpet. But I realized, I said, the prophecy had I would call an allegory. A flaming rock falls from the sky and lands in the ocean. An outcome, two outcomes. A third of the fish of the sea die and the ocean is polluted. Right? And I thought, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. I said, well, obviously no asteroid hit the world, but here is a documented confirmation that a third of the fish of the sea are dead in a single generation since World War II, and the oceans have become more polluted than they have. And the last time I could find that level of destruction in the geologic record was like 25 million years ago. So I said, well, this is unique. This is unusual. So I thought, well, maybe it's just a coincidence. So I started.
you got the third of the fish dead, but you got no rock falling out of the sky.
Right. I said, well, the allegory didn't happen, but the outcome did. And I said, well, maybe it's just a coincidence. So I started looking at some of the other prophecies, and I realized, okay, well, they also have sort of an allegory, and that results in an outcome. And then I started looking at other prophecies that were in Revelations, and I started finding that same kind of pattern. And I started saying, I wonder if I could strip away, if I could somehow separate allegory from outcome, if I could validate prophecies using only outcomes. And if I could develop, for example, if there was 5 outcomes in a prophecy, if I could correlate all 5 of them, that's a perfect correlation. I could calculate valid correlation levels, and then I could use that to calculate, well, what's the probability of that event happening in normal human history? And I actually built a computer model at the time to test this theory.
What year is this?
This was I was at Oxy, so it had to be in the mid-90s.
Okay.
And I had access to a big statistical algorithm program. We used it for geological studies to calculate the probability. We used it for different things, but I could modify it to use for this. And so I spent a weekend. I spent actually a few weeks going to the library, researching real data, because the internet didn't exist back then. And then I spent a long weekend where my son was at my ex-wife's house, and I built up the data tables and wrote the algorithms, and then ran several iterations of this model, trying to correct for errors and things like that. And ultimately the models told me that, and I only used about 25 prophecies, 5 of which were debunked, saying they didn't reach a correlation factor high enough to say they were complete. But of the 20 that were left, I ended up, because a couple of them happened to be these really rare once in every 25 million year events, the probability was at the time 1 in 1.4 trillion. So I was basically saying that it was confirming 1.4 trillion to 1 that we were living in the last days. And I thought this was amazing. But then I left that company. I lost that model. Years went on. I went back to my 80-hour plus work weeks. But over time, I kept taking prophecies and breaking them down. I had spreadsheets. I used Excel, and I had all these spreadsheets where I would take prophecies and I would break down these are the 4 outcomes, these are the 2 outcomes, these are the 6, and I would then look to see, are there any historical current events? Do I find any real world correlations for these things? Now, for a long time, was fairly stable until about the last 10 years, and then the correlations like almost doubled, and the probabilities now at 3.2 trillion to 1 that we were living in the last days. And because the correlations had doubled in a short time, and because that was the factual foundation for what I put in my fictional stories about an AI decoding prophecy, I felt it was important this year to actually write the prophecy analytics book to explain how I developed the
How you came up with the models,
framework, how the framework works, and then how it
rationale
would be
behind it.
applied to hundreds of different prophecies, including most of the biggest pieces of Revelation. And part of developing the framework meant I had to develop a set of principles on how to analyze prophecy. One of the key principles, you're reading the book, was prophecy is not good for predicting the future. And so anything that's in the future or in heaven where I can't validate and verify it, we ignore. So this framework is only good for validating what's already occurred in plain sight, which tells us sort of where we're at in prophetic timeline and what's left. It doesn't do good at predicting the future, and it shouldn't be used to predict the future or try and confirm things in heaven. So that was one principle. And so as I started going through this and started developing the principles around this became sort of a key part of how I started looking at the world, even though I was still working for Microsoft, building software that would change the world on an international level, and building elements that I thought were part of the image of the beast, and all of these things. I was looking at the world through this unique lens, and I didn't talk about it with anybody. It was just my own personal.
Who would you talk about that with back then? I mean,
My wife, she's very patient with listening to me rant about my weird theories. Um, I don't think she understands them half the time, but she's so gracious to, basically I'm the absent-minded professor. She sends me back to my dungeon to work in my laboratory. And as long as I'm happy in my laboratory, she's happy for me. But yeah, my wife mainly. And then that's one of the reasons I started putting them in the books. But my readers would actually start asking me after reading the books, I know the AI said that. What do you think? And I would try to explain, well, it's based on a framework I developed, and I gave it to the AI because that made sense in the fictional world, but it's based on a real framework.
So your new book coming out, what was the title again?
The AI Tsunami, a survival guide for humanity.
Now, is that doesn't sound fiction to me.
Nonfiction.
Okay.
Yeah. I decided to get, and the AI Tsunami, really speaks to, most people don't realize, but we've been working on AI technologies for 70 years. And it's gone through multiple phases, and I was involved in some of those early phases throughout that time frame. The algorithms I developed when I developed my macroeconomic model are very similar to the same algorithms we use, the same formulas, different function, but that we use for AIs to find patterns. So some of these things that we were building the building blocks of what we now call AI. And so I've been involved in some of the phases of this over the years, and started realizing how fast it was developing and how we were kicking off key hurdles as far back as like the 2001, 2012, 2010, 2012. Early on, I started seeing these. Okay, this is a major hurdle, which means that we're this much closer to this other major hurdle, which means, and I started projecting a little bit ahead, and so I wrote Swarm, the first book on AI, in 2018-19. It was published in 2020, 2 years ahead of ChatGPT. I was already talking about not only the ability for large language models to be able to speak in a way that most people couldn't realize it was a computer, but I started also looking at how it was being used in cyber espionage, how it was being used in weapons development, lethal autonomous weapons development, and how it was being used in deep fakes for political reasons as well. So many of the things, mass surveillance. So many of the things we're now people are just becoming aware of now. I was writing about 6 years ago saying, this is just over the horizon. It's not, you won't see it yet. It might seem like science fiction when you read this book today, but give it a year or two and it's going to feel really real.
Yeah, I mean, I barely scratched the surface of using AI. I mean, I ask questions about history and whatnot just to, come up with quick answers so I don't have to go look it up.
Yeah.
But so without endorsing any AI, what AI do you use? Do you use ChatGPT?
I sometimes I don't use it to write anything. I'll use it for research. I'll use it for brainstorming. I'll
But
use
which model do
for
you use? Do you use
I use a couple of different ones between ChatGPT and Claude. Um, both of them are really good. They provide answers in really different formats, and so sometimes if I'm just looking for research, I'll do that from a research perspective, and then I'll have to go and do more research on that to make sure I can check their references.
you'll research the research?
I'll research the research. It's a gift being anal. And then I'll use AI for doing creative stuff. Like when I build trailers, I'll use AI to create characters or animate scenes or to do things so I can make more compelling, more fun to watch trailers for the books. But they're not about the books themselves. I won't let the AI write any page or any paragraph or any part of the book at all,
That call comes from you.
because that's my voice.
The other AI, the actual intelligence.
I am the intelligence. And what I tell people in the book is never let the AI write for you. Let it tell you, give you some ideas, but put it in your own words, put it in your own voice. As soon as you start to let the AI become your voice, you've lost an authentic voice of your own. And I can't do that.
I think that's a big fear that people are having, that AI is going to take over people's minds and their ability to actually think.
And for some people, that might be a danger. There are people that really are looking at it like a relationship, and it's not. They're looking at it like it's a savior technology, and it's not. In some places, there are some people projecting that there's going to be AI deities and religions, which I find amazing, but it's highly possible. We have some very weak-minded people out there.
If you've been in traffic, you can see how some people would fall for that. So
Yeah.
let me ask you a question about the oldest book, the Bible. Do you have a favorite passage in the Bible? Do you have something that you grab onto and repetitively lean on or find to be very helpful to you?
Blessed are the poor in spirit. And I take that now, for they shall inherit the earth. I grew up surrounded by people impoverished in their spirit. No hope, no joy, just trying to get some sort of kick out of life because they didn't really felt that they had a purpose, they had a future, that they had a meaning. Bitter, angry, deceitful, dishonest.
You still feel very connected to that survival mode mindset that you never really liberate yourself from. And those
I
people,
never drank the Kool-Aid of entitlement. I never drank the Kool-Aid that I'm here because I'm worth it, that I'm special. I'm here because of the grace that God gave me. I never could have given myself on any other level. I couldn't have gotten here
that's rule number
unless
one.
it was God's plan. And so, which means that I have a unquenchable need to find and fulfill whatever purpose God had for me in changing my life that much.
You still feel that way? You still feel like you're seeking God's guidance? And
He didn't do it so I could just kick back and enjoy a big leisurely life and spend lots of money on myself and indulge myself. I'm sure that wasn't his purpose. So what was that purpose? And to be honest, I'm maybe prophecy analytics, maybe these books. I'm still actively open to being shown and being led to what that means, because I don't know for sure. I mean, I know what God has done in my life. I know the things I've failed in my life at and the things I've succeeded at. And I know that some people say that I've touched them, and some people say that I've hurt them. So have I really done what I'm supposed to do? Am I a profitable servant or just somebody who got lucky?
so you're still
So there's always a
seeking.
part of me. Go ahead.
You're still seeking his lead and trying to be obedient.
And that's why I wrote Prophecy Analytics, because there's parts of Prophecy Analytics, I don't know what part you've read up to, that will offend certain modern Christians. And I don't want to offend people. I don't want to get in arguments. But it was an honest. I built the framework years before the modern political environment existed. And so the framework was designed independent of all that. It just happens to be leading to correlations that are uncomfortable for people in our modern age who want to believe that um, that prophecy is just metaphorical.
Well, one thing I've learned is if God does not have a problem with me bringing something to him, if I want to argue about something or talk about something, I take it right to him. He is not intimidated by my questions or my questioning, if you will. He absolutely lets me bring whatever I want to into my prayer room, and I do. I bring things that I just don't get, I don't understand, and if I feel like I'm offended by something, I bring it to God and say, "What's up with this?" And I don't always get an answer, but I know that I know that I'm not offending God when I bring it to Him, no matter what it is. So I mean, I can see how.
And I didn't write the book to be offensive, but I wrote it to help people. My hope is that people will at least think about what they're seeing in a different way, that they'll go to prayer. I'm hoping that people will go to prayer and go to the Word and either say, I don't see what he's seeing, or I think he's wrong by going to the Word, but I'm hoping people just don't react without first researching and going to prayer about it. And so I as I said, I felt like before I could write more fictional books about an AI decoding prophecy, I was really felt that I was supposed to write the prophecy analytical books to explain how that all worked and the conclusions it was reaching and how it was reaching those conclusions. But I'm not really promoting the book. I'm not advertising it. It's more of I'm going to let God find who he wants to find and whose hearts see the open hearts that want to read it. And I'm taking it. I have other books that I promote and I push, and that's what makes me money. But this was, again, I think it was more of an obedience, something to be done in obedience.
Wow, that's fascinating. So let me ask you this. I try to ask most of my guests to this. If my listeners could choose something to pray for you about, what would that be? If you could point them in a direction of what kind of prayers you need in your life or in your work or whatever, I don't want to put you in a box.
Yeah, no, that's fine. There's no box. Whatever. We just touched on it. I'm still trying to be sure that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing with the insights that God's given me, and if I have the wrong insights, I'm just pray that God's helping me fulfill my purpose while we still have time.
So guidance.
I'm not 100% sure that I've been kind of doing this one step at a time since college.
If it was up to you, you wouldn't have gone to college. So
I didn't even know what to. It asked me what I was supposed to take as a major, and I was like, I don't know. God didn't tell me that in prayer. I had to do a blind kind of point and point. So it's been I've been trying to just redefine myself, reinvent myself, recover from PTSD, and just try to be obedient to do what I'm supposed to do when I'm supposed to do it. And I may not see the result, and so I may not know that I'm doing the right thing. I'm just hoping God just keep pointing me in the right direction.
Have you read the entire Bible?
Oh yeah, multiple times.
Very, very nice.
But I've now focused on basically the Gospels, and right now, because I'm studying prophecies, the Gospels, because there's a part of me, that part of Revelation that I had to kind of sit and take seriously, was this message to the seven churches. Now, in that message, we have only two churches that really have no rebuke, nothing to correct, and they just need to persevere. They're going to suffer. They need to persevere through the suffering to get their reward. 5 of the other churches need some level of correction, and 2 of them are so bad that one of them is getting ready to be spit out of his mouth, and the other one, God says he's going to come and fight against them. So one of the things I wanted to do in my own personal walk was I didn't want to be so connected to a dogma or a denomination or a church style or type that I was blind to. I needed to be able to look at my own heart against all 7 of those churches and figure out where I needed to kind of get my own act together.
Right.
And honestly, that's my focus. Just trying to figure out from the 7 churches how to get my act together. But what I learned was that sometimes we turn church into an idol. Sometimes we turn dogma into an idol.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes we gloss over the truth so that we can be truthful to our religious, institutional, foundational beliefs and power structure.
That's exactly what the
And
Pharisees did.
that's
That's exactly what
exactly what the
Jesus came to.
Pharisees did, and exactly what we're doing as well. And that's what I'm probably most cautious about.
I can see how I can see how it's easy to do that, but at the same time, that's exactly what Jesus came and rebuked us for, or
Yeah,
rebuked the Jews for.
yeah.
Well, Guy, you're an amazingly fascinating guy. I could probably talk to you all day long.
Thank you,
Is there
David.
anything you want to add before we conclude?
Um, keep watch. Look at the world. If you do get a chance to read prophecy analytics, and that's where your heart is and you're open, just look at the world in new ways and with different eyes, and see and search scriptures and see where that leads you. If you're just looking for a fun time, if you're looking for a James Bond high-tech wow factor of a James Bond and the globetrotting velocity of a Mission Impossible and the religious mysteries of a Da Vinci Code, but with the humor of an Indiana Jones, that's what my other books are for.
Oh,
That's that.
that's
Those are
great.
that's the thrill ride. That's the guilty pleasure. You will get thought-provoking issues out of them, but you're going to have a really much more fun time in doing it. Prophecy analytics and the AI tsunami. Those are for the real geeks who really want to get serious about the topic. I don't recommend those for the light at heart.
So, do me a favor, real quick, and name the fiction books for me.
Books are the first book is Curse of Cortez. That one was on Book Trib's favorite 25 books of 2021. I
Cool.
spent 12 years on that book solving a real mystery of why Henry Morgan would abandon $1 billion of treasure along with 600 souls, and then why he went insane and burnt his logbooks to keep the world from knowing the truth. That
Curse
book is
of
amazing.
Cortez.
Curse of
Okay.
Cortez. The first book in the AI series is called Swarm. The
Ooh.
second book is called The Last Ark. And in The Last Ark, you'll not only continue the AI series, but you'll learn about two genuine, authentic, historical Arks of the Covenant that not only do they both still exist today, both of them have resurfaced in the last 12 years, never covered in the U.S. in the press. They're in play today, and it's a speculative thriller how they could have been impacted what we're seeing right now in the Middle East. And the third book is called The Image, and The Image came out last year. It deals with the program Becoming Conscious, helping CERN to create a mini black hole to prove a fifth dimension. It's going to call the God dimension. And so we're going to deal with quantum properties of consciousness and connections with God. And you'll learn about the lost history of the Shroud of Turin that dates to the 1st century when it was once called the Image of Edessa, and we provide archaeological proof that it existed.
So, quasi-fiction.
Oh, my books are all saturated with fact. They're fiction saturated with factual information because I want to entertain you, but I want you to end with some thought-provoking issues about the real world.
Very cool. Very cool. Hey, Guy, I thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you so much,
You're
David.
endlessly fascinating, and I could sit here and talk to you for hours. If anybody wants to get a hold of Guy, how do they get a hold of you, Guy?
GuyMorrisBooks.com. That's the easiest place to start.
GuyMorrisBooks.com.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you, David. You have a
Have a
wonderful
good
day.